So we've got a full evening tonight, and I'd like to get started. My name is Christina McDonald. I'm the Executive Director of the Yukon Conservation Society. Woohoo! So the Yukon Conservation Society is a not-for-profit environmental organization, and through a broad program of conservation education and input into public policy, we work to ensure wise management of the Yukon's natural resources, wilderness protection, and that development is informed by land use planning. Oh, that's better, thanks. YCS is one of the oldest environmental organizations in the country. We're turning 50 years old next year and going strong. Of course, YCS, although 50 in 2018, is a relative newcomer to the Yukon. And I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and the Ton Quechan Council. I am so pleased to welcome you tonight as we hear from author, entrepreneur, and social innovator Shaun Loney about his experiences with the solutions economy. Welcome to those tuning in via the live stream. Hello up there. We're glad that the exciting presentations we have here tonight can be shared with people across the territory and beyond. Shaun has been touring around the country with his book, An Army of Problem Solvers, and I know that tonight's conversations will inspire us to look at things differently, challenge our assumptions about economic development, and imagine new possibilities for the future of our economy and our environment here in the territory. One key message I took away from reading Shaun's book that is echoed in the approach YCS takes to our work is that environmental issues cannot be separated from social and economic issues. These things are all connected. A number of Shaun's projects focus on energy solutions that not only move communities towards a low or zero carbon future, but make them healthier, more democratic, and more resilient. At the Yukon Conservation Society, one of our goals is for the Yukon to reduce its emissions and build a sustainable energy future that respects our land, air, and water, and that protects this beautiful planet for the generations to come. This means not only breaking our addiction to fossil fuels, but also advocating for energy conservation through behavior change and smart technologies, and supporting local, low-impact renewable energy projects such as wind, solar, and biomass. There is much talk these days about not having to make a choice between the economy and the environment. And I think Shaun's work gives us some practical examples of how these words can be put into action through social innovation. But you might not be here tonight because of an interest in the environment, and I think that's the beauty of community-led economic development. It's an approach that we can apply to any number of social, economic, or environmental issues, and even better, it might be able to solve multiple problems that we didn't even realize are related. So, as you listen to Shaun speak tonight and hear from an exciting panel of Yukon changemakers who will also be making presentations, I encourage you to think about what the Yukon could look like if we embraced the notion of a solutions economy, if we mobilized an army of problem solvers, made connections between our different groups, and redesigned how governments and businesses operate to truly affect positive change. I'd like to acknowledge the funders for this project. This project is made possible with the support from the Government of Yukon's Community Development Fund, Cold Climate Innovation, and our Yukon Conservation Society members and supporters. Please consider becoming a member or making a donation as you leave tonight so we can continue to do this work. We also appreciate your feedback so we can stay in tune with your needs and improve the quality of our events. So please also take a minute to fill out an exit survey, which are available at our booth just outside the door there. Now, I'd like to turn it over to YCS's energy analyst, Ann Midler, who has done a remarkable amount of work to envision and make this project happen. So thank you, Ann, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. I became interested in community economic development about 5 years ago, and as YCS's energy coordinator and analyst for almost 10 years, I felt that community economic development was really important to the work that we do at YCS. Some may see YCS and our supporters as the anti-everything crowd. Rule number 1, do not read the comments. But it is true that YCS plays an important role standing up to say no to development that threatens wild places, destabilizes the climate, is just bad for the environment and by extension, communities. Oil and gas development, fracking, some mining are not worth the gamble for jobs and revenue they promise. So while it is the Yukon Conservation's job to lead the charge on no sometimes, we also want to say yes. We say yes to Yukon's energy solutions, and we're saying yes again to economic solutions. We say yes because people and communities need jobs and revenue. We need energy and food. Right now in the Yukon, we're pretty vulnerable considering how dependent we are on importing these things. Addressing our vulnerabilities, reducing waste, and plugging leaks in the economy will not just create jobs and keep money in our communities, it could make our food healthier, our jobs more satisfying and flexible, and communities stronger and more resilient to climate change, global change, economic change. That was my takeaway from reading Shaun's book, An Army of Problem Solvers, Reconciliation and the Solutions Economy, and why YCS wanted to bring him here. And just so you know, tonight is the first of 4 events as part of the Yukon Conservation Society's Solutions Economy project. We also have a full day workshop tomorrow. It's full, sorry, registration is closed. Good thing you're here tonight. Then we have a day on the road, an evening presentation in Watson Lake, and a workshop as well in Watson Lake on Thursday. So it's a busy week of talking about and working on social enterprises, economic diversification, and solutions in the Yukon. Tonight we're here until 9, and there are 2 parts to the evening. Up first, Shaun Loney's talk, followed by a question and answer. Then we're happy to also showcase some local solutions in action with 5 compelling stories of social enterprises or concepts happening here. But first, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. Shaun Loney has co-founded and mentored 11 social enterprises, including Build, Inc., which won the 2011 Scotiabank Eco-Living Green Business of the Year and the 2013 Manitoba Apprenticeship Employer of the Year. Before co-founding Build, Shaun was Director of Energy Policy for the Government of Manitoba. Loney is the first Prairie Canadian to be awarded an Ashoka Fellowship, which was in 2015, and was Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year in 2014. Shaun lives in Winnipeg and is proud to be part of a strong and visionary social enterprise team that's flourishing across the country. Please join me in welcoming to Whitehorse, Shaun Loney. Oh, and I will also give the disclaimer, PC and Mac, not friends. So unfortunately, Shaun will be scrolling through his presentation, not as ideally as we wish that he could have. Yes. So you want to use this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Wanted to say thanks to Anne especially. She somehow got a hold of the book maybe a year ago, and somehow or other Max Fireweed Books store in Whitehorse bought an entire case of books, and I think that they're almost out, but they still do have some left. So somebody's reading it up here, and I know just from what Anne's told me, and also other things I've read in the net and in the newspaper, you guys are doing lots of really exciting things here, which is pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to learning from you in these next 4 days. And yeah, we put this book out about a year ago. We've sold over 6,000 copies. A friend of mine said, I didn't know you could read a book, let alone write one. And so maybe we all have a book in us, I don't know. Problems are really paramount. We've got governments talking about austerity. We've got lots of financial issues, and just give you some examples from Manitoba, and I know these probably aren't too different here, but in terms of incarceration, according to the Auditor General in Manitoba, it's $220,000 per jail cell, and in Manitoba we have a shortage of 2,700 jail cells in the next 7 or 8 years that need to be built, and at $80,000 to $100,000 a year to put somebody in the jail cell, that is $1.5 billion of our taxpayer money, just in an increased cost in what's going to be required in Manitoba to keep up to the pace. Similar situation with healthcare. David Dodge, the former Bank of Canada governor, has warned governments that 80% of provincial and territorial spending will be on healthcare by 2020, leaving only 20% for everything else. And 75% of healthcare costs are on diseases where diet is a main risk factor. And governments are doing next to nothing about diet. And problems also continue with child welfare. In Manitoba, we have more Indigenous kids in care than we ever had in residential schools. So we're doing it all over again. It costs $1.8 million to keep a kid in care from baby to age 18. And we've also got this little tiny problem called climate change, which is don't even bother talking to the climate scientists. Talk to the insurance companies. This is a real and present and really expensive problem. In Winnipeg, we just spent over $1 billion deepening our floodway because these 100-year floods seem to be coming every 10 years, and they're getting worse. So I believe that the reason why we have so many problems is that governments are focused on the problems, and they should be focused on problem solvers. And that's a real shocker to governments, actually. It probably seems quite logical to most regular Canadians, but governments are stuck in that paradigm. So we're going to talk a bit tonight about these two paradigms and how exciting the problem-solving paradigm is and how expensive and inhumane the problem-making paradigm is. But exactly who are the problem solvers? Well, in the book, I talk about them in 3 different categories. There's social entrepreneurs. We've got many in the Yukon. We're going to hear from some later. But the most common talked about social entrepreneur is Elon Musk from Tesla. And one of the common things about social entrepreneurs is that they're interested in transforming sectors rather than just making money. So if you're interested in starting an electric car manufacturing business here in Whitehorse, Tesla's plans are on the internet for making their vehicles. The small farm and local food movement is growing very quickly. In Manitoba, we have about 400 small farms that use virtually no pesticides and no synthetic fertilizers. And that's amazing for a few reasons. One is that we have a huge phosphorus problem in Lake Winnipeg, and that's largely because of big agriculture and all the phosphorus that's dumped in the form of fertilizer on land. And we also, with fossil fuels, and I talk about in the book how, by many estimates, about 90% of the cost of growing food in the corporate sector is actually fossil fuels. It's not transportation. That's why we don't hear much about the 100-mile diet anymore, because transportation is just a tiny amount of fossil fuels compared to the enormous amount of fossil fuels used for pesticides and also for synthetic fertilizers. But also in places like Manitoba and the Yukon too, we've got lots of people living in the cities and very few people living in the rural areas. And so this emerging economic ventures are very important for us as Canadians. And we also have social enterprises, which are similar to the other two, but they're nonprofit. So we can look at this continuum, and sorry that the PowerPoint is messed up here a bit, but you see charities that are on the left, so you can think of something like a food bank, and then you see all the way to strictly profit-seeking companies like a McDonald's or a Walmart, for example, and different iterations in the middle. You have nonprofits like CYS. And there you have social enterprises. So social enterprises are very community-minded, like a chief and council might be, or a nonprofit, but we use market tools to achieve our mandates. And this is something that is emerging everywhere. They're really popular. Social enterprises go where the private sector and governments cannot. And what's really important is that I think that they meet what is Canada's defining issue, and that is connecting people who most need the work with the work that most needs to be done. Give you some examples of some projects that I've been involved with, or some ventures I've been involved with. This is a staff photo from Build in the north end of Winnipeg. Build has lowered utility bills at 16,000 low-income households over the last 11 years, and has hired and trained about 700 people, most of whom very long criminal records. In fact, it's tricky to get a job at Build unless you don't have, you need to have a criminal record, basically. You need to be, have no work experience, no driver's license. And that is the folks that we're focusing on. Interestingly, 75% of job postings in Canada now require a driver's license. And of those 700 people we've hired, none of them have had a driver's license. Their access to driver's training is very limited. The utility bill reductions that these folks have done results in about $8 million a year in savings for governments and also for their service providers and low-income families. And I'm told that just in this picture alone, there's people from about 6 different street gangs. And over 11 years, Build has never had any issues with any violence or theft, and our recidivism rates, or how we say the number of people that are back in contact with the justice system within 2 years after exiting jails with Build is 20%, but our provincial average is in a shocking 75%. And so we're very proud of what we've accomplished, but we're just building momentum. Build is moving into some new areas, including solar installations, and also they've been doing some roofing lately. This is Manitoba Green Retrofit that we set up in 2009, and it main reason why we set it up is to hire Build's graduates. So they're doing apartment renovations, and largely for public housing, and they also do bed bug remediation. In fact, you're looking at the bed bug remediation crew of Manitoba Green Retrofit. We love bed bugs for social enterprises. Love bed bugs. Why? Because you can hire people that to remediate the bed bugs and move them out of poverty. And this is what's really exciting about this new paradigm, is that all this money that's being spent on poverty and things like climate change and problems in general can be repurposed and instead focused on solutions. And I'm going to give you some tools that governments are beginning to use, especially at the federal level here in Canada. The federal government is beginning to say some things that would lead us to believe that there's some exciting policy changes coming. I hang out mostly these days at Aki Energy. Aki is an Ojibwe and Ojibwe word for earth, and we do a lot of geothermal on First Nations. In fact, we've done $8 million worth on 5 different First Nations using no government funding. And also an exciting thing about this paradigm, but I'm going to come back to how we work at Aki. I'm going to use it as an example. But to continue on with some of the other economic ventures we're onto, this is Meacham at Garden Hill. Garden Hill is a fly-in community. I know you've got lots of those here. And massive diabetes problem. There's a dialysis unit there that is $1 million a bed to build, $100,000 a year to put somebody in the bed, and there's 38 people at Garden Hill on the waiting list for dialysis. 4,400 people at Garden Hill, and almost half of them either have diabetes or are soon to have diabetes. and this place is called Garden Hill. And when I got there, I could see the diabetes, but couldn't see any gardens. And I talk about in the book what happened to the gardens in Garden Hill, because I think that's an important question for Canadians to know about. But Meacham is an Ojibwe word for food. We asked the elders, well, what do you, can we use good food? And they all kind of looked at each other and were confused because they don't have a word for good food. Because there wasn't good food and bad food. There was just their collective diet, which meant that there was no diabetes as recently as 1970 in Garden Hill. And now we have this epidemic. Government is not going to solve this problem, and the private sector is causing the problem. In fact, they're both causing the problem. So we know you need a problem solver to solve a problem. So Meacham is a social enterprise there. We have a 13-acre farm, about 1,000 chickens at a time, which, by the way, is illegal in Manitoba. And I said, I don't care how many chickens we have, I just want it to be illegal. Because there are so many rules set up to prevent the reemergence of local economies, and these rules have to change, and we're going to talk a bit about that. We have an orchard, and we're also, this is a photograph of the size of the farm area that was cleared. We thought they might clear 3 acres. We asked the First Nation to clear the land, and they cleared 13 acres, which is a huge area. And they said, Shaun, we would have cleared more, but we ran out of gas. And when they were clearing, they actually took the topsoil off too. So we've been busy. And this is a beautiful thing about how these small farms work, is that the chickens are moved every 3 days. So the manure from the chickens is what is used for fertilizer. And we're also buying a lot of bycatch for fish to put into the soil, and the yields have been really, really good. We also started a healthy food market. So the way the old paradigm might work is to increase people's social assistance rates, which is only going to cause people to go over to their only choice where there's food is at the northern store. In the northern stores, the prices are very expensive, and the vast majority of what they sell is unhealthy. So we set up a healthy food market, and this is our second or third sale at the TV station. You can see the TV in the upper left. We think it's the only healthy food shopping channel in the world. And we sell so much now, about $20,000 a month, that the last time I was there watching things transpire, we sold 17 cases of bananas in 2.5 hours. And the food is inexpensive. We're creating employment locally, and it's also a place to sell food that we grow at the farm, grow and raise at the farm. We're also bringing kids from the school to the farm. You can see here they just planted seedlings, and they each have their own plot at the farm. And what's happening is that they're bringing the parents to see their work at the farm, which is pretty cool. So these are some of our Winnipeg and First Nation social enterprises, and we're located at the Social Enterprise Center, which is right in the middle of North End in Winnipeg. It's 30,000 square feet and full of Indigenous social enterprises. And it's a pretty inspiring place to work. We have about 200 people on our payrolls now, and we've made a pitch to the provincial government to increase the amount of work we do for Manitoba Housing from $6 million a year to $50 million a year, which would increase our payrolls from 200 to 1,000 at a time. And this is what you call social procurement. That's one of the words I'd like you to remember tonight, is it's probably the most important tool governments can use to really boost social enterprises. We've also started a social enterprise in Brandon called the Brandon Energy Efficiency Program, and it's run by a nonprofit called the Brandon Neighborhood Renewal Corporation. Building up is in Toronto. Just started 2.5 years ago. They have a $3 million a year revenues now, and they're doing water retrofits, and they've already reduced water bills enormously in a lot of low-income housing. And Impact Construction is in St. John's, Newfoundland. It's one of the largest residential contractors in St. John's, and hiring mostly people that are homeless. So these are some projects I've been involved with here in Canada, but Scotland is the place to go to really see what the future looks like. And I'm just back from a trip from there. I'm researching, writing a new book, and there's 5,600 social enterprises there. That's one for every 1,000 people. And 5 of my 8 great-grandparents are Scottish, and up until I went to Scotland, I was thinking, wow, I can be proud of haggis and bagpipes. But these folks are really serious about problem solving. These social enterprises, half of them hire people with barriers to employment. If you look at Canada's top 100 companies, none of them are at all interested in hiring people with barriers to employment. 2/3 of these social enterprises are run by women. Canada's top 100 companies, only 2 are run by women, 2 out of 100. And the average wage differential in these social enterprises is 2.5 to 1. That means the CEO makes 2.5 times as much as the average worker. And in Canada's top 100 companies, that number is 7,465. And the average CEO has made as much as the average worker well before lunchtime on the first day. And so my question for you is, if we're interested in employing Indigenous and marginalized people in this country in this period of reconciliation, if we're interested in gender equality and income equality, would it not make more sense to have more social enterprises and transform the economy? Now, I want to get back to Aki Energy a little bit and talk a bit about geothermal. And I think there's plenty here that's very relevant in the Yukon. But we've chosen geothermal. These widgets are different depending on where you are. We're insulating in Winnipeg's inner city and doing water retrofits, geothermal on some First Nations, food in others. But geothermal's massive reduction in energy, very labor intensive, which is great if you're trying to promote employment. It's repetitive, and that's the best type of work for trying to get people into the labor market, is so they can get good at something quickly and move on from there. And it's a known technology. There's a difference between technical innovation, and you're talking about things like hydrogen and so on, and social innovation. Social innovation is what's going to make things happen. We've got plenty of technology to solve all the world's problems. The issue is how governments relate to the technology that's available there already. Here's just a few pictures of some of my coworkers installing geothermal at Peguis First Nation. You may wonder what geothermal is. We sometimes call it ground source heat pumps or just heat pumps, and you all have one at home. It's your refrigerator. The black coils at the back are taking the heat out of the refrigerator and dumping it into your kitchen. So all this is doing is taking heat from below the frost line and dumping it into the house. And there's also compression involved there. Now, how do we go about installing $8 million worth of geothermal with 0 government funding? This is an example of how social innovation happens. We've got Manitoba Hydro provides us a $20,000 up front. We install a geothermal. You can see the heating bills marked in the red collapse. And Manitoba Hydro puts a charge on the utility bill, indicated there in yellow, which they continue to collect until they get all their money back. And there's still net savings left over. And this is the tool that utilities have used to hook up every building with electricity, with water. Utilities make the investment up front, and then they get their money back for the capital over long periods of time. So if we can use it in these types of utilities that we're all familiar with, why can't we use it for renewable energy as well and not depend on government for funding in order to move forward? So we call that pay as you save. And this is also the mechanism that is going to solve the child welfare crisis, because $1.8 million to keep a child in care from baby to age 18. There are plenty of Indigenous models that are working, focusing not on the children, but focusing on the parents. And the parents responding very, very well to supports. And the cost of providing those supports to the parents is minimal compared to the cost of keeping children in care. And so governments must begin to use tools like this in order to make sure that the funds are available for solutions up front. Because that's the problem with solutions, that they are, the costs are expensive up front, but cheaper down the way. Same thing with renewable energy. It costs a lot to put up a wind turbine or solar panel, much more than plugging into to a fossil fuel pipeline, but a lot cheaper as you go forward. So this is what it looks like to a homeowner. The bills before we get there, maybe $300 a month, and the bills after, $275 a month. But what happens is that as rates increase, the savings get larger and larger and larger as time goes on. And of course, you also have the employment benefits, and you're moving people off social assistance, and you've also have carbon reductions, which aren't even included in that calculation. But what's really great about this is it just makes all the resources you need available to see solutions to scale when you need them. So in Manitoba, we think there are 10,000 houses that are good fit for geothermal. And again, I wouldn't focus too much on the widget, but just focus on the scale. That's $20 million in capital. Half of that would be on reserve labor. And massive employment benefits, huge reductions in electricity, and great for emission reductions as well. If you went to government and said, do you have $200 million to install geothermal on First Nations, a few things are going to happen. First of all, they're going to say no, because we're too busy paying for high utility bills and child welfare and so on. But they're also going to set up a tendering process, and that's going to mean companies are going to come in from outside. And then no one locally is going to know how to install the equipment. They're not going to know how to look after it. And after a while, it's not going to work, and the equipment's probably not going to be very efficient or very durable. And this, usually when I'm talking about this, the chief and councils that are in the room, their heads are just bobbing. And that's why we have all these boil water advisories in Canada. So it's time that that stops, and we just take a minute and focus on setting up social enterprises in Indigenous communities so that they can get this work. We made an announcement. By the way, do you like that? Do you like that model? So we liked it so much, we went to the Wew'suwet'en Ojibwe Nation, 400 houses there, good fit for geothermal, $8 million worth of work, half of that on reserve labor. Made an announcement that we're about to move there, and the federal government sent us this little email and said, we're not going to pay that financing fee. And so that's interesting. You're choosing high utility bills, which create no employment, over low utility bills, which create employment. And they said, yeah, if you want to do business on First Nations, you do it our way, which means you apply for funding. And this is what colonial governments do. They want to maintain control, and their mechanism for maintaining control is funding. And we made an announcement. We went to the media, and with some great coverage nationally about this. And we got a call from the minister's office from Ottawa within 24 hours, which I thought was pretty good. And she said, Mr. Loney, we're very concerned about this, and we want you to know we're going to restore your funding. I said, well, that's interesting, because we don't have any funding. So she said, you don't want funding? I said, no, we don't want funding. We want you to bring in this pay-as-you-save system so every First Nation in this country can benefit from all the tools that the rest of us already have to be successful. So she phoned back 2 days later, and remember I was telling you that the Wew'suwet'en project was $8 million. She said, Mr. Loney, we found you $8 million in funding. And we said, we don't want your funding. We're not taking it. We are going to fight you until you give First Nations and Indigenous communities in this country the tools they need to be successful. And 6,000 books later, I can tell you we're almost there, which is why I'm writing another book now to say what social innovation is really looking like on the ground. We think we've got a solution that doesn't even involve the federal government, Department of INAC. Now, yeah. So what that looks like for us is taking foundation money. Foundations have two kinds of money. They have endowments, and then they invest their endowment and they grant out the interest, the earnings from their endowment. Foundations are going to give us money, and the federal government is going to pay them back out of the savings, which means a bottomless pit for the amount of money that we need, all delivered in an accountable fashion. And they're going to also value us being able to take people off social assistance and the carbon credits, which is great. Governments don't usually work that way. And so super exciting. So those are all on-grid communities. We're also working in Northlands, and I know you're doing lots of this stuff in Yukon, which we're going to hear a bit more about, but it's a Dene First Nation, and they're off, they could say they're off-grid, so everything there is supplied by diesel. And the diesel leaks. In fact, the federal government says for every dollar they spend on importing diesel from Texas and shipping it all the way up there on roads and winter roads, they spend another dollar cleaning it up. And this is your taxpayer money. And there are no jobs created from any of that locally where they're needed the most. So this is Northlands and some of the contaminated spots there. And most of those spots, the spot on the upper left is by a school. And the spot down by the lake is where their Head Start and child care programs are. This is inexcusable in this country, that this type of behavior happens, that we continue to do things to and for people that are not in their best interests. So we're working on, and it's being constructed right now, a significant solar project that is going to provide the electricity we need to run biomass and also a lake-based geothermal system. So you can see the solar represented in blue and the biomass storage facility in green. The yellow is a lagoon that is going to be also powered by solar. And the cluster of homes down by the lake is going to be fed by a lake-based geothermal system. So that loop, instead of that loop I talked about at the back of your fridge, it's going to go below the ice in the water. And this is what it looks like. These are actually live human beings from Northlands, Dene First Nation, becoming experts on installing lake-based geothermal loop. And they're putting coils over it here to protect it and securing the coils to the fencing and then wading it into the water. And that will be plenty to suck enough heat out of the water to heat 14 buildings, and this is just a start for us. Now, the biomass is a significant opportunity. This is the black area is burnt forest, and only 10% of that burnt forest, pre-dried wood, great for biomass system, is enough to provide heat for the entire community for 200 years. And why we've been hauling diesel up there is an excellent example of governments being focused on the wrong thing. Great for employment benefits. And this is the chief looking at some the biomass that's been collected. And this is a biomass unit. You see there's a walkway sort of on the left where the wood chips come up. They get dumped into the fire. The fire heats hot water. The hot water is circulated through the buildings. And there's 50 Hutterite colonies in Manitoba that provide their heat this way. And this will be the first First Nation in Manitoba to be doing this. Also solar projects, we're installing a significant amount of solar, probably about as much as 3 football fields, in order to supply the juice that's needed to run those renewable systems. Now, the question I have for you to demonstrate what this paradigm is about centers around this statement. There are 2 million liters of diesel fuel consumed in Northlands annually. Now, would you say that that's a good thing or a bad thing? You might say that's a bad thing. I'm going to make the case that that's a good thing. You think we can do that? That's a potential market for $36 million of renewable energy in the next 10 years. You install $6 million worth of renewable energy, both capital and operating costs, that's a 16% rate of return. Now, in order for that statement to be realized, we need to make a shift in how our society thinks about these things. And first is that there is an upside to down. I was telling you how much I love bed bugs. I also like the fact it costs $1.8 million to keep a child away from his parents. That's money that can be repurposed. I'm kind of pumped up about the diabetes costs in some Indigenous communities in this country, because that money can be repurposed for food and other exciting things which I talk about in the book. We also need to connect what we have with what we need. I'll give you an example. In Curitiba, Brazil, they had a massive garbage problem. And I talk about this in the book. And they also had empty seats on their transit buses. So they gave people a token for transit if they brought in a bag of garbage, for every bag of garbage that they brought in. And within 3 months, there was no garbage in Curitiba, Brazil. The solutions are often different than what we think. I talk about in the book about a thing called carrot rewards. Is it an iPhone app that is changing significantly how people, the amount of exercise they get and how they eat, because people are getting air miles and movie scene. And these are the types of things that we need to get into low-income communities, because I know kids in Garden Hill First Nation that would eat grass to go and see the Winnipeg Jets play. And so if on their iPhone they had to follow the doctor's instructions around the amount of exercise they get and caloric intake and so on, that would be pretty cool. We've also got we need to focus on the problem solver, make it easy for problem solvers, ask problem solvers what they need. We're going to hear from some problem solvers here shortly. And in Garden Hill, what we're now moving towards is asking social assistance recipients if they would like to receive a healthy food box. It's about $150 a box, that if you were to buy it at the Northern store, it'd be like $250. And the box will be full of as much local food as possible, so fish, potatoes, chickens, anything that people that's healthy that can be brought locally. That is a great way of recirculating money that's already being spent, but not only lowering diabetes, but creating employment. And so we're pretty excited about that, but you got to focus on the problem solver. We need to start thinking about market services rather than funding, because governments are not going to be able to get to scale with funding. Businesses get to scale, and community-minded businesses do activities in the market sector that are beneficial to the environment and beneficial to the community. And we also need to be focusing on policy much more than we are now. 1 million acts of charity do not add up to one small victory in the area of policy. Imagine this pay-as-you-save being available all across the country is a huge, huge benefit. By the way, in Garden Hill, again, our main competitor is a northern store that sells mostly unhealthy food. There's a Nutrition North Canada subsidy program that is widely used in Yukon. And $1 million a year of your taxpayer money goes to the northern store that sells mostly unhealthy food and a couple other retailers, but just in Garden Hill. You know how much Meacham Foods gets? Nothing. Because in order to be eligible, the food has to be flown in from outside. This is the type of actions that are going to stop in this country, and they're going to stop now. Now, yes, thank you. So policy, we've got to be focusing on policy. Now, in the book, I talk about the 3 poverty myths and things that I've been kind of surprised about. One is that we often hear, if there were just more money, we could deal with climate change, or we could deal with diabetes, or we could deal with child welfare. The problem isn't that there isn't enough money. There's lots of money. It's just being spent on the wrong things. Now, folks that are generally consider themselves to be on the right of the political spectrum, and by the way, I think the political spectrum is being blown up completely by this whole move into the solutions paradigm, are quite troubled by the fact that low-income people actually want to work, because the myth is that low-income people and Indigenous people don't want to work. I can tell you with the utmost certainty that that is absolutely false. We have 5-year waiting lists at most of our social enterprises, and people are really, really keen to work doing things that are not soul-sucking, and that are things that are interesting and that fit with their values. The last poverty myth is that poverty has causes and climate change has causes. It's actually not true. Darkness has no causes, it's the absence of light. Cold has no causes, it's the absence of heat. And poverty is nothing more than the absence of prosperity. And that's really good news for us as Canadians, is that we can focus on prosperity if we want to deal with poverty. Because this focusing on poverty, getting at the root causes of poverty, it's not working. And our neighbors, our friends and neighbors deserve better. So, as I was saying, there's 2 kinds of money, and just going to wind up here. And social enterprises are really focused on all the money that's being spent anyways. And that gets us out of just focusing on the funding dollars. And when we do that, we're going to see this big shift towards a problem-solving climate where there are resources available for solutions, where the solutions are within the community rather than brought in from the outside, and where ecosystems generate solutions rather than what we have now, which is ecosystems generating problems. And when we do that, I think we end up with an economy where the environment is protected and the people who need to work the most have ability to gain access to the labor market. And I think that that's pretty exciting. I really appreciate you inviting me here this evening, and you coming out on a beautiful evening here. I just got here today, and I'm super looking forward to going to Watson Lake as well in the workshop tomorrow. But I understand we've got a bit of time for questions, Anne, is that right? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Shaun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to turn these mics on, and I'm going to give one to Christina. We're also taking questions from the live stream from people who are tuning in from home and around the territory. Anyone have a question for Shaun? Christina will run the mic around.
How many years ago did you get started on this?
Well, build is, that's a good,
Sorry, in order for people tuning in to hear, you have to speak to the mic. Sorry for that.
I can repeat it too.
How many years ago did you get started on this mission of yours?
I've heard that question before somewhere. Well, build started in 2006. So I was working at government at the time, and just interested in making change. And I had one of those things, plastic things you put over your teeth at night so you don't grind your teeth away. And I just quit. I just couldn't. My health couldn't take it anymore, and I was much more interested in. Thank you, Anne. It's much more. It was the best thing I'd ever done. It's just, my life is so much richer, and I think that we all want to feel abundance, and it's hard to feel abundance when you never have enough. And I've been feeling abundant since I made that shift. But that's the first thing I wanted to say about that. The second thing is, what I didn't realize until even just very recently is that our actions cause future things to happen. So our lives are making ripples in the universe. And so what I thought we were doing is starting, build, and insulating a few houses. And what I didn't realize is that it was an entire movement. And it wasn't just me. I mean, there's people that came before me, and there's people that'll come after me. But that's a pretty exciting concept to know that, you know, whatever cool stuff you guys have been doing with your lives is impacting it's being felt. And when you go to places like Scotland, you really know what the future looks like. And my partner and I were in a double-decker bus, and we're coming into the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, and it was a contest to see who could see the next social enterprise. There's so many of them, and I just think that's really cool that we're going to get to that here. The federal government's moving quickly, I think, in that direction, social procurement, social finance, and we're going to hear some more about that soon. Thank you for the question.
So where do you get this training to become a social entrepreneur?
Well, I didn't have any training, but it's really listening to people in the community with what they need. I'm scared of Anne, so I'll make sure I get this close one. But I've been doing a lot of workshops, and this is a bit of a taste of it, but it's sort of a 3-day workshop that really gets people what they need to get started and to really understand the context. And so those things are emerging. Red River College is just starting a 2-year diploma program on how to start and run a social enterprise. It's going to be housed in the Social Enterprise Center in Winnipeg, and we're hoping to take it on the road. And there's a national organization called CEDNET, which is fabulous, the Canadian Community Economic Development Network, and they have lots of resources online as well. But you can read the book and get a pretty good sense of it as well. I just came from Camrose, Alberta, and there's 4 social enterprises there that are starting to be developed. One is already going, called NAWO, which is working with Musqueam First Nation and installing solar. They've already done 10 projects, which is pretty cool. So yeah, things are happening.
Thank you. So there are in the renewable energy space, there are private companies which are going to these remote communities. Right. Do you think it's going to be a competition to a social enterprise, or is there enough space for both the players?
Well, there's, of course, we buy a lot of heat pumps every year, and they're from private companies. But I think in the end, we need to shift our thinking from lowest price to best value. And if private sector companies can provide that, then they should be providing that. But I don't know too many private sector companies that know how to work in Indigenous communities the way that they should. But I'm all for private companies providing best value. Manitoba Housing, imagine that, so we do $6 million a year business with them now. And they just tell the private sector, look, if you're interested in hiring ex-cons and training them, we're very happy to bring you in on the pie. But they can't do that, and they're not interested in doing that. So in Scotland, every single public tender that goes out has to consider social enterprises. So it really puts the power in the hands of the taxpayer, and it puts the power in the hands of the community, and I think that's a pretty healthy combination. Good question.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm JP. What have you done? Community-owned solar project or otherwise, and how do you go about approaching it, or the community? What's the first things you do when you are engaging in the community?
So Aki Energy is an Indigenous nonprofit. So people will say, well, how can you as a non-Aboriginal person just waltz in? I don't. Aki Energy goes in, and I work for Aki Energy. So we talk to them about about social enterprises, and we're there to fill in the gaps. We're not there to do everything, and with a goal to try to get the capacity built as quickly as possible. And we're never going to be very far away. And one of the interesting things about the project, which I meant to mention and didn't, in Northlands, is that all of that technological stuff you saw isn't really what's important. What's important is that we believe that the federal government has agreed to pay a social enterprise in Northlands for delivering renewable heat and renewable energy. And that will unleash as much capital as is needed to remove all the diesel in northern Canada. You won't need any government funding in order to do that, because really what we're asking the government is, will you agree to pay what you are going to pay anyway? In fact, we even sharpened the question a little and said, would you agree to pay 10% less than what you're going to pay anyway? And up until now, their answer has been no. We would rather pay the bigger amount of money to cause problems and bring diesel in from outside. But we think that that paradigm is about to shift, and it's about to shift quickly. That doesn't mean that is the role for funding. There's a role for funding, but it can't prevent scale from being achieved, because our problems are pretty urgent when you start thinking about things like climate change and unemployment in Indigenous communities. So yeah, and the first things we talk about are about the capacity building, and then just the shift to them doing things for themselves, and how we're there to support them to do that. That's a great question.
How are we doing for time, Anne? Okay.
Yeah, good questions.
I'm curious where you got the first money to start this off, because it obviously had to start somewhere.
In 2006, natural gas prices spiked, and that's when I was working at the government, and they wanted to do something for low-income families. And that was, there was some talk about giving out rebates, and I talked them out of that. I mean, it'd be so expensive, and you just don't really get anywhere. So why don't we put some money into retrofitting? And so the government ordered Manitoba Hydro to begin to insulate low-income housing. So that's essentially where it came from, and then there's some training dollars involved as well. But interestingly enough, when it comes to energy efficiency programs that are being run by utilities, our activities in places like Whitehorse are actually subsidized by them, because they are also paying to utilities that are supposed to be doing renewable energy. It's probably less common here in the Yukon. It's the same thing with recycling. When you buy a stereo, you pay a recycling fee, but there are no recycling services on First Nations. At least I've never seen a First Nation with government-funded or funded programs. So I think it's imperative that everybody has equal services, and that there's ways to go about doing that. But yeah, we got started with the government interacting with Manitoba Hydro to create an ecosystem where we could be successful. Did you shut my mic off because something happened there?
No, I made it better, but I'm sorry I didn't do that earlier. But
We've
That
got
might be
one more
sick.
question at the back here.
okay, one question, then we also have one from the live
Okay.
stream as well.
Okay.
I'm interested in the example that you had with Manitoba Hydro, and I think it was $20,000 per unit that Manitoba Hydro fronted for, I think, over 20 years payback. I might have those numbers wrong, sorry. Was that it for the alternative energy source?
Yeah, except the numbers are correct, but how they're described isn't quite right. So it's
Okay.
20,000, but it's not funding, and it's not ratepayer money. It's not a grant, it's not a rebate, it's financing.
Okay.
So the money is paid back, and it's not really a 20-year payback, because the bill savings are immediate. So if it was in a traditional payback question, it would probably be more like 6 or 7 years. But Manitoba Hydro recently announced a 47% rate increase over 5 years. So the bill reductions that were shown in that pay-as-you-save graph are just going to be way bigger than what anyone thought.
So in that example, what is it that Manitoba Hydro draws on to participate in that?
Well, companies like Manitoba Hydro, they borrow money all the time. They borrow money to build dams. They borrow money to build other kinds of infrastructure like transmission lines and substations. So it's the same. But the difference is that this is secured debt, because whoever's paying the utility bill is going to be paying back the financing fee, and it's not a loan because it's attached to the house. So if somebody moves out of the house, you don't have to worry about paying the loan back. Just whoever moves into the house will assume the payments.
So Manitoba Hydro doesn't look at it as lost revenue then?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, they are avoiding the building of new generating stations. They're avoiding building new substations in these communities that are growing quickly. They are selling the electricity into Minnesota, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. And they are actually showing the regulator that they're actually doing something for what we call hard-to-reach customers. So they get lots of benefits out of it, but they don't put much in the way of costs. They do incent. Their incentives are in at the back end, but yeah, they're very happy with it, and I certainly commend Manitoba Hydro for jumping on that as quickly and as big as they have. Live stream.
That question got answered by Julie. It was an environmental question, and it was about does the heat pumps in the lake, from Johnny M, will taking heat out of the lake adversely affect the aquatic ecosystem and carbon cycling? Is that an answer?
Well, the first time I flew into Northlands, or looked out the plane, and it was in September, and you could see the mist coming out of the water, and you could also see all of these trees, just square miles after square miles of these trees, and the mist coming out of the water is just heat leaving the water. So there's a massive amount of heat in the lake, and putting a loop in there like that is just a tiny drop in the bucket. So I don't know if that's the answer that she got, but that's what I would say. Okay, I think that's it, eh?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to say thank you very much before she grabs the mic. It's been, and we have books for sale, and I say we because the revenues go to develop social enterprises, and they're $20, or pay whatever you can. If you don't have the $20, we want you to have a book, and they'll be available outside afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shaun. And hey, Shaun, we're going to bring you back up again after our panel, so you're not gone forever. But thank you. Okay. All you have to do is press play. Okay, thank you to my assistant there. Okay, great work, Shaun. That was so hopeful and inspiring for what we can explore here, and it was great to learn a bit more about the social enterprise model and how it's working. Shaun Loney's book was really compelling, and as was the idea of economic solutions, and when we thought about bringing him up to elevate the discussion around social enterprises and social and economic innovation, we wanted to explore what is happening here now in that realm. And it turns out we've got some cool organizations and projects that are innovative, are mission aligned, have multiple positive outcomes, and may challenge traditional concepts of economic development. And we will hear about 5 of those organizations and projects tonight. The presentations are fast, 8 minutes each. I'm going to be ruthless. You saw me with the mic there. So each of our speakers are going to come to the stage as I introduce them, then they'll leave when the next one comes up. After everyone's done, are you listening? And then when everyone is done, we're going to bring them all back up on stage for some Q&A. So that's how this next section is going to work. And also, Shaun, we're going to ask you for your reflections first. So pay attention. And you're going to be on the hot seat. Okay, so great. So to start us off in a good way, They are all good ways, but we have the Director of Coal Climate Innovation, Yukon Research Center, Yukon College. Stephen Mooney might be the only person in the Yukon who can get as excited about and talk as much about kick sleds and revolutions as me. So please welcome to talk about Biomass, a Perfect Storm, Stephen Mooney.
So use the mic or? Thanks, Anne. And I do like her kick sleds. I've had them before you had them, I think. But I'm here to talk about biomass. And at the Coal Climate Innovation Center, we've been at this for about 7 years. And, you know, Shaun mentioned you listen to the community. And what we have had come into our office, we have an open door policy for Yukoners to bring their ideas to the Innovation Center. And we try to help their individual ideas go from idea through research, innovation to commercialization. But the big three that we focused on have been food security, energy, and housing. So it fits right down the bailiwick of what Shaun's talking about. So what I'm going to talk about is biomass in the Yukon. So the Yukon situation. And there's a bit of an error here, but there has been a study done, $200 million in diesel. It's not diesel, it's all the fuel that is brought in. But that's just to show you that all that money that we're bringing into the Yukon is not staying in the Yukon. It is leaving the Yukon. And why? You know, historically we brought diesel in. It's easy, it's reliable. You can sit on your couch, fill your tank up, and you can let it go, and it works. Diesel is great. It has a lot of energy in that little liter, but there are huge impacts, and we've heard about them. Everyone knows about them. The Yukon has a lot of buildings that are heated with diesel. So what's the solution? The opportunity is heating independence. Use wood, biomass to heat our buildings. And people will say, well, you've been doing it for years. Turn of the century, we've been burning cordwood in the Yukon for years. But cordwood is old technology. What I mean by cordwood is those logs that you go into the bush, you chop all the limbs up, you buck up the logs, bring them to your house, and you throw them into your wood stove. Well, newer technology in the cordwood industry is those large boilers, stand outside boilers that you may have seen. Well, the technology now over the last 10 years and basically in the last 5 years has really changed, and it has given us the opportunity, what I consider the perfect storm of why biomass is so good for the Yukon economy. First of all, the technology is incredible. In Austria, there's 32 companies in that tiny little country of Austria that you can drive around in one day. 32 different companies that are building biomass technology. Finland, that country, 25% of their total energy in that country is from biomass. They know how to use their forest, the renewable resource from there. And they use wood chips. Cordwood, I had 3 biomass experts from Finland come here 2 weeks ago. And they were shocked, and I just said, hey, we're infants here. You've got to see what we're doing. So I showed them one of those outdoor boilers, and they're going, are you serious? You use this stuff still? And so technology is here. Now, Shaun was talking about the money. Well, the money is here, and it is federal government departments that want to look at diesel reduction in the north. The Pembina had an energy conference here a week ago. A lady from the federal government stood up and mentioned 8 different federal departments, and the number of dollars that she was just stating. And I was trying to do the math in my head, being an engineer, and it was over $4 billion. But one INAC, in the next 5 years, they want to drop $200 million in the north to reduce diesel in the communities. So the opportunity to use that is there. So then the last is, do we have the supply? Every Yukon community, including Old Crow, has biomass that we could use to heat our homes. And the whole thing about the beetle kill, the fire killed, every community eventually will have fire-killed wood in the Yukon. fire smarting our communities, preventing a Fort McMurray. That is a serious danger to the Yukon. So this is what Cold Climate Innovation did. 2 years ago, we worked with Raven Recycling and ACS Mechanical, industry partner, and we brought in this Hargasner Austrian technology. So the picture in the top left-hand corner is the actual unit, but the one in the bottom left-hand corner and the right, the two bottom pictures are this unit sitting at Raven Recycling. So what Raven did was they stockpiled 20 tons of pallets that were going to go to the landfill, and we brought a grinder in, and they ground up all the pallets. And basically in 2.5, 3 hours of work, we had enough to heat their building for a year. So those pallets that were heading to the landfill got diverted. We crushed them up. We pulled as much nails as we could out of those pallets and ran it through this machine. This machine is CSA approved. We ran it for 3 solid days and then pulled 5 pounds of nails out of the ash box. And that's not healthy for one of these machines, but the thing worked. And this goes to show that that technology is there, that those nails went through the auger system into the combustion chamber, but the ash auger took it out and it didn't hurt that machine. So now we say, let's get the fuel, the feedstock right, and we're off to the races. So Teslin. So we used Raven Recycling as a pilot project, and whenever I heard that the First Nations were in town, got a hold of them and said, listen, you got to come see Raven. So the classic was the chief shows up and we tour him through, and a week later we get a phone call, Mooney, we want 10 of them. And I went, really? And he goes, 10. And I'm going, when a chief says he wants 10 of them, you find them 10. So we've worked with them. They built this project. Now they have 13 buildings they're going to heat. The project, 1.6 million, they found 1.3 in funding, in grants. So now what's happening is they're paying their local citizens to get that biomass. And the economists say, you bring a new dollar into the community, that's going to recycle 3 or 4 times. So there's a lot of things happening. So a few pictures of what's happening in Teslin. There's the hopper of a 2-unit one. This is the wood chip storage outside their community that they're bringing in the wood to, chipping, storing it there, and then they'll truck it into the community. This is Elmer talking about a guy who loves his job. I gave him a moisture meter. That's what our highest end swag from the Cold Climate Innovation now is, a moisture meter for the communities getting into biomass. But Elmer was climbing all over the pile, checking the moisture of those wood chips, because they're that is incredibly important when you're feeding biomass. You need to have dry wood. So now the future, where we can take, so this is the baby steps into biomass. Now we're going to the highest end of biomass in the world. So this is the biomass unit from Finland that actually makes heat and power. So it makes 100 kilowatts of heat, but also 40 kilowatts of electricity. And we're working with this Finnish company, 3 federal government departments, and this unit will be showing up at Yukon College in January. So we're going to run it there. And the classic is, if anyone remembers the gasification unit in Yukon College, that unit had a serial number of 001, and that unit did not work. This has a serial number of 0086. This company is going to be building 90 to 100 of them this year, selling them. This technology works, and this is what our remote communities and other communities in the Yukon could use. So that's it. 9 minutes, Anne. Thank you, Masecho.
Oh, right on. Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm super pumped about the wood chip revolution and local biomass, displacing imported fossil fuels for heat and power, and all the multiplier effects and socioeconomic and community benefits, and perhaps social enterprise can play a big role in that harvest. I'm super excited about that. So next up, keeping us going in a good way, is Shauna McCrindle. She is the Employment Program Coordinator at Yukon Association for Community Living. She supports the development of education and awareness campaigns and tools to inspire employers and the public to understand the contribution that people with intellectual disabilities or autism spectrum disorder can make in the workplace and to the economic life of our communities. Today, she is here on behalf of an ad hoc committee she co-chairs with Volunteer Yukon to bring thrift back in style to the Yukon. Shona.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so my name's Shona. I work at Community Living, and we work with people with barriers in the community, employment, living, whatever it might be. I'm here tonight on behalf of the movement of energized and talented people who kind of voluntold me to co-chair this herding of cats. We have an eclectic congregation of NGOs who has seen an opportunity, who's identified a gap, and who are doing their darndest to make something exciting happen here in Whitehorse. So as many of you know, recently our Salvation Army closed, and now we have nowhere to go and get thrifty and buy affordable goods, really, is what it is. And also donate things instead of to the landfill, right? Waste diversion. So there's lots of good things that can come out of this project. The one thing that all of our NGOs have in common is that we want to improve the lives of Yukoners, and we all have varying opinions on how we're going to get there. But so far, that's our baseline, which is pretty high up here. So yeah, what are we trying to bring back? Well, it's that thrift, that vibe, but we want to do it really well. We want to thrive. We want to be successful, self-sustaining, something that will be involving as many community partners that want to be there, and that also that money goes right back into the community. If it's through opportunities for people to learn job skills, if it's through giving funds to charities who are doing other good things in the community, we want to be there. And so, like I said, our main goals are to divert waste. We want to add affordable, high quality, well sorted goods. We want to create job opportunities for people to learn. And it's not just intellectual disability. That's what I specialize in. But, you know, the amount of people that walk through my door that need help, I wish I could just say, you know, yeah, I have like 6 jobs over here that are good for you. Okay, I'm going to way over time. But yeah, so we wanted to bring together all these voices, and I think today the theme is sort of how do we change that barrier or that challenge into opportunity. So how do I change that language? I mean, we have a lot of different opinions, a lot of different skills, a lot of different backgrounds, and we want to make it all happen. And we have this huge lofty goal of creating this amazing center where communities can learn and grow together. But really that opportunity is also meaning sitting around a table and having really long conversations, and sometimes, you know, banging your head against the table. Sometimes it's about finding the common ground amongst all these groups and making it happen. And so our critical success factor for our group will be to maintain healthy and constructive communication as we go. And so I say we have multiple organizations involved. Let me tell you who they are. We have the Maybacher Animal Shelter. We have Volunteer Yukon, which I mentioned is also a co-chair. Bruno kind of started the herding of the cats, and then somehow I got roped into it too. We have Little Footprints, Big Steps. We have Yukonstruct, who has said they might be interested in co-sharing the space, which I think would be really exciting. A lot of people here know Yukonstruct, and they've won awards, and they're an amazing local group who does social enterprise pretty much. So what does our thrifty store look like? We want it to be sort of that classic place where you go and you kind of rummage through a rack of fantastic offerings that someone else didn't want anymore. But we also had someone approach us about bike repair and bike rental, and even if it's for a short week or maybe it's for a season, because we have a lot of sort of visitors here. So Philippe Leblanc kind of was like, well, I have like 150 bikes. I was like, ooh, that's exciting. Why don't we have that there too? And then there's the thought of, well, what about repairing electronics and furniture? I mean, that's something that we all lack in our community here, but we have so many skilled people that could contribute. And that training opportunity, again, giving people the opportunity to learn. The amount of people that walk through my door that say, just teach me something. I mean, I'm really good with little pieces, or, you know, that thing that came out of the box that didn't have any instructions. Yeah, I can put it together without instructions. That's great. So really, in the end, we want to make something pretty cool happen. And so I think a couple of the barriers that I'm kind of throwing out to the public right now and to my colleagues that are probably going to be presenting tomorrow at the workshop, you guys get to sleep on this question. One of our biggest one is the economy constraint here in the north in our little community is our geography. Our little valley means that we have limited warehousing stock, which is kind of close to a central location. And it makes for a bit of a landlord's market in our world. Rent is high, and the facilities aren't always great. I mean, there's a few big places in town, like I can think of 3 off the top of my head right now. And so that's where we're hoping to sort of collaborate with bigger fish like Yukon. But if you guys have any ideas, you know, we're open to it. The other thing is, yeah, it has to be accessible to downtown because it has to be someone on foot or on a bike that can get there, right? But it also has to be big enough so that we can sift through the junk that's going to come through, and that's a thing. Many of the other stakeholders involved, including the city of Whitehorse, who used to have a free store over at the dump, which got closed, is that there's a bit of a culture of, I can't throw it out. It's still good. When meanwhile it has like mustard, ketchup, and God knows what stain over here. That's not as easily repurposed as something else. And so a big problem that even Raven has jumped in on has said, you need a gatekeeper. So we need a place to sift and repair all of the sort of treasures. So I'm going to wrap it up very quickly. This community is primed to support this initiative. There are a lot of people that say, I'm interested. We even got some curiosity from a minister, which is great. CDF wants to help us, which is the Community Development Fund. Right here, we love you. We want their expertise. We don't necessarily want the money. Like Shaun was saying, we don't need the funding. We have looked at the preliminary financials. We're doing a feasibility study with the help from the Salvation Army. They had money coming in. It was just a matter of it was going out. It wasn't actually staying local. And so we've identified some really good opportunities. I'm excited to hear from anybody here who's got expertise in junk sifting, thrift shopping, managing a team of interesting people, collective, eclectic. Yeah, reach out to us. I'm at Community Living. My name's Shona, or you can go to Volunteer Yukon. And that's me.
Oh, that is very cool. I look forward to finding out what kind of support I can provide to that, and I love the thinking bigger about, like, is it a place where tinkerers hang out and fix the things, and, you know, repair cafe, you know, 2.0 and really big. And that's great. Thank you so much for that, Shona. Okay, next, Kashadahene. Danny Cresswell, former chief of Carcross-Tagish First Nation, currently keeps himself busy as the field operations coordinator for on-the-land stewardship, guardian, and monitoring operations for Carcross-Tagish First Nation. Danny's also the chair of the Carcross-Tagish Management Corporation, and if you've been living in the Yukon, you will know that CTMC has a lot of stuff going on. So Danny has his work cut out for him to focus on some highlights in 8 minutes.
Thank you.
Do you want to use this one?
Yep, this is good.
That one's good?
Yeah, this is going to be like a torture test here.
Thank you very much. I'd like to really thank you for your presentation coming up here. I skimmed through your book there over the weekend, and pretty much everything that you've talked about in there is what Carcross is going through. And about 10 years ago, well, 20 years ago, we started talking about some of this stuff. We weren't self-governing under the thumb of Indianac Band. We said we need to be as self-sufficient as we possibly can. How do we start doing that? And we started down a trail. And pretty much everyone who's come into power, I guess, the chief and councils at the times, or the Kashada Honeys, sometimes we've done voting, sometimes appointments, has strived to get a little bit better and get rid of this. One of the first things we passed as a self-governing First Nation is the Family Act, and it's basically a child welfare act, enhanced to include the family, community, clans, get rid of all the garbage. And government's still reeling with that one a little bit. Some of the training you talk about, we took 16 people off SA and built 3 tiny homes. An entrepreneur would never do that because it costs about $1 million for those 3 tiny homes. But we had 16 people who were full-time SA. It was going to become a way of life. Their families were leading that life. Over a year and a half of training, the tiny homes were a byproduct. They were some of the best constructed buildings in the Yukon, probably. They did classes in the morning. We looked at every angle of their life, what situation they were in, every individual, their families, their kids, and put the resources into it. With psychologists, we had counselors, instructors. We had a union that had a couple of First Nation people that went through some of this stuff before. They came up and were the instructors, and they wouldn't put up with any of the BS. You know, things were going to get done. You want it done properly? Yeah, we're going to get things done properly. And laid down the law with this bunch and said, this is what we're going to do. Do you want to be a part of it? We had 16 of them said yes, 15 finished. And the graduation was amazing. We had letters from the RCMP and the nursing station saying the effect in a community of 350 people by these 16 individuals and their families had changed around so dramatically it was noticeable in the entire community, which was pretty amazing. 2 years later, we started building one of the biggest projects we've done in Carcross. It's a $16 million learning center. It's basically a potlatch house with a college, part of an archives, learning center for elders, youth, where we can hold our potlatches, get them out of the schools. And 80% of the people on that workforce were our people, basically because of this program that we ran and investing in them. And they're still working, they're still going on. Some of them are moved down south working with the union. Other companies that we work with, we run them through this scenario, what we've done. They're big, huge companies, things we're gonna bid on, work with. And they, and we say, you know, it's not all about the profit. I mean, we sit down and meet with them, we start the relationship with anybody that we're gonna work with, and if the relationship there, it's there. If we got the same values, we can move forward. If we're not, it was great to meet you, and we have to move on. We're growing our own food, the diabetes problem. More workforce. Well, we're selling chickens right now, some pork, vegetables. We imported some bees. We've got bees going. They've been seen in all different small gardens throughout the area, which is quite something. That's all on about a half an acre. And there are, I don't know, 6 pigs and about 400 chickens. They butchered a whole bunch. We just ate one last night. It was pretty good. They just got another big bunch in. But recently we just purchased the old Brannigan farm of 160 acres. So this is going to make a little difference. We're also in the feasibility part. We're about to present it we've presented it once. We're going to go back with a lot more information, business plan on aquaponics. about a $16 million investment on another 2.5 acre parcel that we're gonna use for this. That should be big enough to supply about 18,000 people with fresh vegetables. We're gonna start looking at berries. It's fresh greens. It's only greens, and then fish. And it was toss up between tilapia and Arctic char, but I think we're going with Arctic char, looking at that market. So that's hopefully, if we follow the timeline we put for ourselves, we could start construction of that this spring. And then our farm, I mean, there's enough place for 8 residents on there. We're also looking, which could possibly be on that piece of land as well, but we have another piece of land in mind, is the whole training thing with the tiny homes. We want to do that, but we want a housing manufacturing construction unit where it's full-time jobs for some of the people in there, and the rest of the people, it's all under training. And there's the whole aspect. There's the carpentry, electrical, plumbing, and I didn't know until I was working with that union and did a tour of their place, the one of the union we decided to work with, that flooring's a whole separate discipline on its own now. It's not a part of, I mean, carpentry used to do pretty much everything, but they said flooring is separate now. So we'll be looking at something like of that starting up. I mean, we've got a lot of other stuff that's in the fire, in the burner as well, as they say. But as a whole, as the First Nation as a whole, with the corporation, I know some corporations have gone out and just, it's out to make money. Some of our investment dollars were there. And when we start talking about an investment, I mean, it's an investment in ourselves. It's an investment in our people. You know, healthy, happy people make better decisions. You know, they want to care for their kids. They want to make sure they get an education. They want to teach them their culture. You know, if we're going to make an investment, I mean, a rich, powerful country, you look at the people. I mean, what kind of richness do they have? Are they a culture? You know, I mean, my First Nation's a culture within a culture, a nation within a nation. So, and like you said, nobody's going to do this for us. The government can give you enough to keep you down. And that's about all they do. And and even if it's not good for you, it's they can say to the rest of the world, we gave those Indians $60 billion last year. You know, we're taking damn good care of them. And hopefully we get a government that does start turning around and do the right thing, and let us be able to take care of ourselves, because we can do it. We've known it all along. The problem was someone else's laws, not our laws. So under self-governing, rewriting our own laws, and I do believe other First Nations without a self-government agreement that are sovereign, you know, they should still be making their own laws. You can't be sovereign if you don't make your own laws. If you want to be sovereign, you act sovereign. Does Canada act sovereign in the rest of the world? They have damn rights. Well, it's made up of a lot of other sovereign places to make this country great. But they just need to start recognizing that, I think, and appreciating it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danny. You can see why Carcross Tagish Management Corporation was just honored with some accolades. Economic Developer of the Year, runner-up for excellence in Aboriginal economic development by CANDO, which is a national Indigenous organization involved in community economic development. And it's great. I am so inspired by Indigenous nations in the Yukon taking charge and showing us the way of some awesome community economic development. Our next speaker is very familiar with the beautiful Carcross Tagish First Nation territory. You might know Kelly Milner from her work on the amazing film Shift. Kelly started her career as a journalist, but ended up with a master's degree in science and got lost in the wilderness of northern wildlife management and land claim implementation. In 2015, after 2 decades of writing briefing notes and project reports, Kelly decided to get back to her creative roots. She brought her 2 worlds together and founded Shot in the Dark, a production company that tells stories and explores issues and ideas that matter to people who live in the North. And I'm really excited about what she's going to talk to us about today. Welcome, Kelly Milner.
Thank you. This one? Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Danny's a tough act to follow, though. Well, thanks for coming out. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about a new project. Well, it's not that new of a project, and I do have some pictures. Okay. A new project that I'm working on. It's nothing to do with film. This is... we can go to the next one. This is a project that started, I think, kind of where all good things maybe start. It was over a bowl of caribou stew, visiting some friends of mine up in Old Crow. And this is Stephen Frost Sr. and Harold, his son and grandson, Travis, and they're trappers. And they run the group Trap Line up in Old Crow, and we were talking about how their year was going and what was going on, and they were saying, oh, well, you know, we're not sending our stuff out this year because it's just not worth it anymore. We're just not getting very good prices, and it's almost a shame. It's a shame to be sending out this fur. It's not respectful. It doesn't respect the animals. It doesn't reflect the work that goes into it. And we started talking about, well, you know, how do you change that? How do we address this problem? And their first answer was, well, we should have a party. Because of course that's what you do. But really what they were talking about is back in the day when trapping really was, it was part of the lifestyle up here. It was something that people did. Rendezvous was a big thing. It wasn't just about, you know, hairy leg contests and things like that. It was where trappers came together, and that's where you traded and you talked, and there was usually a dance, and you sold your fur. And so we started talking about, well, how could we bring some of that back? How can we get back to celebrating fur? Because it is part of our history, it's part of our communities, it's part of our economy, and it's something that really is being forgotten. It's not necessarily as apparent to those of us, you know, maybe here in Whitehorse, but certainly in the smaller communities, it really is. So, how do I run this? So here's who we are. We're sort of a ragtag group, we're not really anything. There's myself and the North Yukon Renewable Resource Council, which is a resource council out of Old Crow. And we roped in the Trappers Association because we figured they should also get involved because they're the industry association. And we started talking about, well, what could we do? We want to have a party, yes. And after much thinking and thinking and thinking, we came up with this idea for an event, really, is how it started, but we're calling it Unfurled. And, well, what is Unfurled? It is an economic thing. It's really a grassroots cooperative market development program. That's what we're looking at doing. We're looking at rebranding and reconnecting people with fur. We're hoping to connect trappers, people who are out there, with buyers, and whether those are people who are buying things to make other products, or it's people who want to buy fur and get somebody to make it for them, or do it yourself, but get people back to understanding how fur relates to the way that they live their lives. It's really about promoting that local sale. It's about selling fur here, from here, to people who live here. And it's looking at just Yukon fur and Yukon fur products. And it's really about igniting an understanding of what fur is and how it relates to our day-to-day lives, and have pride in it, to be not ashamed, to not be fearful of wearing fur, because there are some social stigmas that have been associated with it for a really long time. And the way we're going to do that is through quality events and workshops and programs. And this whole idea is just, it keeps getting bigger and bigger into, I call it an octopus, because it seems like every time I turn around and I've talked to somebody about this, somebody else has an idea of something they want to do. So it's been pretty fun. We want to talk about, I was asked to talk about what is the problem. And really the problem is when we've got fur The trappers take it, it gets bundled, it goes to auction. It's a commodity. The Yukon, we grow some of the best fur because it's cold here. So, it's really high quality fur, but we don't produce a lot of it. So when it gets bundled, with fur products from other places as well. And so, in some cases, trappers aren't getting a lot of good money for that fur. And then for the crafters, they're not really able to source Yukon fur. Unless they know the trapper directly, it's really hard to make that connection. So if you want to have a Yukon fur product, it's often hard to do. The crafter might be buying, something from Halfords or something online, and you don't know where that's coming from. So how do we break that? And so really, when it was like, who's our competition? Right now, we're talking about we're taking on the Hudson Bay Company, basically. We're trying to cut out the middleman and have that direct sales and keep the local sales here in the community. So just briefly, what are some of our challenges? We have many. The first one is kind of, what are we? We did literally start as a bunch of people sitting around a table, and it's just grown and grown and grown, and we don't really have an organization. We're not a nonprofit, and we're a movement, which is kind of exciting. But really, it's that tendency to not try and get too big. We do have government agencies, it seems to be a theme tonight, who are like, oh, this is really exciting, we want to get involved. But really the thing that makes us interesting to them is the fact that we're not a government-funded program. We're different, we're unique, and we are very grassroots, and we don't want to lose that. So how do we keep this momentum, and how do we keep growing, but without really losing, what's made everybody very excited about it. We do have barriers. For us, one of the biggest barriers initially was just going out into the broader trapping community, and there wasn't a lot of trust. They're like, who are you guys? And what do you think you're doing? And haven't we heard this before? And get lost. And they're all a bunch of introverts and didn't want us bothering them. So it took a long time to kind of convince them. And I mean, we still have a lot of work to do. But there's also the perceptions. And part of the reason why there's that lack of trust is that perception of fur. We know that that's something that we have a challenge. And we have to come up with ways to convince people that fur is something that is wild and sustainable and warm, which leads to where we see this is going, is an actual sort of branded movement and looking at selling products that are, I'm for real. These are real. This is real fur. This isn't synthetic fur. This is from the Yukon. It's wild. It's harvested sustainably. We have regulations in place, and it's warm. That's why it makes sense for us here. It's not just fashion. It's function, and we should be really proud of that. And the last thing, just quickly, one last challenge is skills. We have lots of people who are interested in this, but it's also a very dying, there's a dying skill set, people who know how to handle fur and work with fur. And so that is one of the things that we're seeing we need to work more on. But in terms of whether or not this is sustainable, I don't know. We really don't know. We're giving it a try, though. We know we need to figure out how do we keep this momentum. We are having an event. It's in March. All of this stuff is happening around it. It's this octopus that I keep trying to stick in a box, and the tentacles keep flopping out all over the place. But we're hoping that there will be, there's all this interest in developing, like, is it going to be a cooperative afterwards, or what does this look like? But the fact that people are actually talking about it, I think, is the most exciting thing. And I think where it goes is we're all going to be part of finding out. So, thank you for giving me a moment. Oh, and I have one last thing. You guys, look underneath your seat. There should be an invitation to unfurled under somebody's seat. And if you're the lucky winner, you win the fur ball. This is a black wolf pom-pom made by the Haines Junction Sewing Group. They're making fur pom-poms for all of the Arctic Winter Games Team Yukon toques for this year as part of this initiative. Nobody has it. What? I stuck it under, it was somewhere over here. You got it. There you go.
Oh, so cool, Kelly. You know, I've got at least 2 tentacles coming out about this project, and some of it's about like helping Indigenous nations reclaim and reoccupy trap lines and land-based healing, and you know, generation hand down of those skills. And back when I was a trapper, I was very angry when we had to give them on spec to the auctions, and then you get very little back and you feel pretty ripped off. So let's keep those raw resources here and add some value. And I love your idea. I can't wait to talk more about it. Okay, so finally we have some wonderful women who are doing a fantastic project, Emily Payne and Erin Nicolardi. Emily Payne is a certified teacher with over 10 years of experience working with youth of all ages. She holds a Bachelor of Education in Indigenous Education and a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Geography and Sustainability. She's worked as a youth leadership trip facilitator across the globe, speaker, curriculum designer, and classroom teacher. Erin Nicolardi is a teacher, a certified wilderness first responder, and a canoe tripping and flat water instructor. She is interested in risk management and the benefits of risky play, bird language as a doorway to awareness, the power of song for learning and processing, and how to create accessibility for young people to take part in programs that connect them to the land. So welcome, Rivers to Ridges.
We have 2 mics?
Oh, yes,
we can just go back and forth. That works too. Great.
Okay, is one off? Oh, they're okay, wait, I turned them both off. Okay, they're both on now. Sorry, everybody.
Good evening.
Hey.
Lovely. Awesome. Here we go. Great. I'm Emily. This is Erin. And we run Rivers to Ridges, which is a local organization in town doing nature mentorship programs.
Yeah, and tonight we're going to be chatting a bit about some of the wild solutions we've found to get our programs up and off the ground, and how to build healthy communities through land-based learning.
Great, and just want to acknowledge we're on the traditional territory of Kwilindud First Nation and on Quechan Council tonight.
We feel pretty lucky to do our work there.
So our aim at Rivers to Ridges, so basically we're just going to run through some kind of, if you don't know what we do, we're going to talk a little bit about what we do and then talk about this new exciting idea we have. Our aim is basically to empower young people to feel confident, aware, empathetic, and connected to their community. We do that through the lens of nature mentorship, so mentoring kids on the land and asking them to live the questions instead of ask for the answers, and joining in with them on that.
We have our whole slew of programs. Our most popular ones right now are camp programs, but we've dabbled in a bunch of different areas, and these are just some of them. We'll talk to some of them throughout the program or throughout the presentation as well.
Great, and so we have one thing that we do that's a little bit unique is we bring in this idea of core routines, something that we use in all of our programs with the kids when we're out on the land. Yeah, let me talk about the second two. So all the ones on the left side there are the things that we do with every program consistently. We have the kids go out and do sit spots. Has anyone ever done a sit spot before? Yeah, sit spots. So sit spots are something that we do with all kids and adults too. We take the kids out and invite them to go find their special, better, sorry about the echo, yeah. Find their special spot somewhere and settle in and just observe, to just watch the patterns, watch the creatures, watch the life unfolding around them. And then to return to that spot over and over to see the seasonal changes and to see the patterns that emerge over time to develop that connection and love of land.
And these core routines, there's a lot of amazing rec programming that exists in Whitehorse and in the territory, and we really wanted to kind of bring in something we saw as a gap, which is some of the softer skills, some of the awareness-based skills. So you see bird language up there, paying attention to what the birds might be saying is a way to heighten our awareness of the forest and what's going on. And then also sharing gratitude as a way to put a lens on for the day that allows us to see the wealth and the bounty around us in the natural world.
And the last one there that's super important is that intergenerational. So in our programs, always having family days, bringing in, auntie and uncle and grandma and grandpa and the siblings into the program so that we share that language. Nice. And yeah, we have a lot of different inspirations for the program. Pinecone, Natural World. Yeah, we're both teachers, have a teacher background, so we like to bring in this idea of assessment and working with the kids on an individual basis. And Coyote's Guide is one of the foundational books that we use for some of our programs.
We also like to work with and are developing our relationships with the local First Nations. We're lucky and continuing to form partnerships that allow us to bring elders onto the land with us, because we don't have the land-based connection here that folks that are from the land can bring. And we also seek inspiration from some of the other schools around the country and the continent that are doing similar work, connecting children to the land through mentorship.
Awesome. So you want to talk about this one?
Sure. So we'll get to this a little later as well, but we were thinking about social and environmental innovation, how they're linked, and how people that see spaces for innovation often need to shift their perspective from looking at cracks as a metaphor, looking at cracks as damage that you're just going to repair the same way over and over and over again, the way it's always been repaired. Instead, you know, looking at these cracks as opportunities where the light can shine in, and you might see something a little bit differently and maybe like open that crack up and expand instead of just plastering over it. So we try to think about that when we come up against challenges that don't, you know, when we want to run a program and it's not happening, how can we take a look at that wall in front of us for a crack that might allow for an opportunity?
And we've had a lot of challenges along the way, a lot of things that have been obstacles and potential roadblocks. We've been fortunate enough to have some amazing community partners and supporters, which for us has been a foundational part for the success of our programs. Initially, when we had this idea of running an after-school program, and we started a partnership, just the two of us, and we're like, how are we going to get this out in the community? And so we approached the city of Whitehorse. We have this dream, we have this program philosophy, you know, can we work together to make it happen? Like, that sounds great. So we've been partnering with them for the last 2 years, offering programs. And that's been really fantastic because it makes the program accessible for kids, you know, all different ages, all different backgrounds. Another awesome, we've had the opportunity to work with Quanlin Dunn, which has been a really great experience up in McIntyre there, and CoSpace, which we're working at right now, doing a business incubator program, and they're helping to mentor us. And for the project, which we'll talk about, we're going through some initial market validation training and learning a lot about the steps that we need to take to create success.
And we left a little question mark there because we're taking a look at what partnerships might work as we go into the future. So these are some pictures of children in our programs. And just a quick story about these kids. We had a whole plan for them one camp year, and we ended up scrapping it completely because they had better ideas than we did. And they developed an entire forest economy that we were able to watch them develop and create because we listened to their need. We didn't just go with our plan, we listened to the need of that community.
So listening to that need, here's an idea we have, and we've been exploring it. We're currently still exploring it and looking to see if what kind of what's the local market for a program like this, and how do we work together to build a sustainable and innovative model that accesses lots of different kids from lots of different backgrounds. So yeah, we're currently exploring the idea of building a forest school, starting up a forest school here in Whitehorse. And we are basically currently seeking partnerships and support for an idea like this. And we're talking to lots of parents and people who might have kids within the preschool age. So we'd be starting with preschool. And the reason why we're seeking partnership support primarily, is looking at, we want to make this program really accessible, which is super key. We want to be able to pay people a fair wage for the work that they're doing and the experience that they're bringing, and to provide a bursary fund for kids and families who might not be able to access the program to make it possible.
Some of the things you can do if you want to follow along with what we're up to, you can connect with us online. If you have ideas for innovative partnerships, we're really interested in talking about that. And you can just continue to be role models for the young people in your life through connecting to the natural world with them and on your own. So how many seconds are we at? 22?
We can do it.
You think?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, real quick, we need all of you audience participation.
So one thing that we really like to do to build community in our programs is we like to sing. Hands up if you like to sing. Yeah.
If you don't like to
put your
sing,
hand
it's
up.
okay,
Hand up
because in the
high, hand
community
up
you
high.
can't hear just you. So.
So we'd like to sing with you. Sing with us. So here's how it goes. You might recognize the lyrics. It's from a Leonard Cohen song. It's really simple. It's a call and repeat. So I'll call and then you repeat. And if you don't want to sing, you can just tap along. You tap like this. Is that the right beat? Okay. Forget your perfect offering. Just ring the bell that still can ring. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. Forget your perfect offering. Just ring the bell that still can ring. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. I love singing together. It's one of my favorite things. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock. I'm going to use my executive decision. I am so happy. I'm so proud. I am a catalyst. I brought all these people together, and I'm so happy to have shared them and learned some more about them. And I'm going to think good and hard about how to best support them. So it's already 9, but I just want to do 2 more things. If you are interested in any of these initiatives, then get involved. Find these people, find a way to support them, find out what they need, and make it happen. Catch them in the lobby. I just want to finish by letting Shaun have 1 minute to reflect on this amazingness that we just all were party to here. And then I just have a few closing words.
Somebody keep Anne away from me because I got more than 1 minute to say. The first thing that is obvious to me is that all of these solutions are very indigenous. And I think that's good for us as Canadians to remember. The land-based education, of course, extremely indigenous. In the future, and maybe in the near future, there will be resources available that come from the savings from reduction in dropout rates. Because what you're doing, and what all of these programs are doing, and ventures are doing, is saving governments and taxpayers a lot of money. But the resources aren't there now to ramp them up. And in Danny's example, all the things that First Nations are doing, governments traditionally fund problems. So it's important for us to know how First Nations have been treated. If there's more kids in care, they get more money. But to support parents, there isn't anything available there. So you're finding a way around that. Maybe it's because you're self-government, but that's a really important model for all of Canada. And the last thing I want to say is the disruption that's taking place and the paradigm that is emerging. Where just think in the world we have now that the largest taxi company in the world owns no cars. The largest hotel chain owns no property. The best thing we can do for our healthcare expenditures has nothing to do with hospitals. It's food. The most progressive education is going to take place outside of schools. And child welfare will have very little to do with children, to do with parents. And that's a pretty exciting paradigm that we're moving into. And I hope you can get a glimpse of that in the book, because moving away from a problem-making paradigm into a problem-solving paradigm, it's this on steroids. And wouldn't that be an exciting place? And just so inspired by all the things that are happening here. It's just really, really cool, and looking forward to sharing that. And Danny also, I think, has a title in the book that I'm writing. I just love that. The government will give you enough to keep you down. He's not saying we don't want your money. He's saying we want to save you money by doing things that are cost effective, like keeping parents with their kids, and like local healthy food instead of imported unhealthy food and diabetes and so on. So was really inspiring to hear that. It was very nice to be with you this evening. Thank you very much.
Right on. So just a couple closing words. Here in the Yukon, we've enjoyed generous transfer payments from the federal government and low unemployment. But we've heard from, don't want to be a Debbie Downer, we've heard, though, that there may be lean times coming. And I've heard elders say that hard times are coming too. So how can we best position ourselves? How can we use these opportunities to make us strong in the face of the changes that are going to be coming our way? So after hearing Shaun speak and after hearing these local change makers, I'm excited to see how we make that happen and see how the solutions economy can grow here. So one more time, please thank me so much in thanking Shaun and also our amazing Yukon awesomeness. And thank you all for coming and staying till after 9. I'm so sorry. I hope your babysitters will forgive me. And support these social enterprises. And please, if you can, fill out a survey on your way out, or if you need to take it home and drop it off at YCS, it would be very helpful for us. A recording of the evening will be available on the YCS's website. YCS will also be developing a report about the activities of this week. And thank you to everyone who made this evening possible. Safe travels home.